the world is a cruel and dangerous place. Civilians are tortured and killed, often by the very governments that are supposed to protect them. In Sudan, the horrors of ethnic cleansing. In Chechnya, Russian troops kill thousands as they fight separatists. Human rights are a casualty of America's war on terror. And the one organization we want to trust seems paralyzed.
While the United Nations may not be able to take humanity to heaven, it must act to save humanity from hell.
People are angry and demand action.
If we turn our heads and look away and hope that it'll all disappear, then they will.
If we don't respond to genocide, what does that really say about us?
So who can protect these people? One person does have that job.
Your name? Louise Arbour. I'm the High Commissioner for Human Rights for the United Nations.
My job is to promote and protect all human rights of all people, all the time, everywhere.
Being the UN's top-ranked human rights advocate in a post-9/11 world doesn't make you a lot of friends. In fact, it can make you some deadly enemies.
Tonight, a terrible blow to the UN as 16 die in a bomb attack on its headquarters in Baghdad.
Among those who died, a highly respected senior UN diplomat, Sergio Vieiro de Mello, UN High Commissioner for Human Rights.
Louise Arbour is a Canadian lawyer. She's been a provincial judge, an international war crimes prosecutor, and in 1999 she was appointed a justice on the Supreme Court of Canada. A lifetime appointment, and for any lawyer, the pinnacle of their career. Then one morning, her phone rang.
In the fall of 2003, maybe October, I came out of court one day and I had a message to call the Secretary General of the United Nations. And when I did, he said, I need to replace Sergio and I'd like you to come and join us in Geneva. I was totally stunned. I hadn't expected that. And, but at the same time, I didn't think I needed more than 2 seconds to answer. I said, no, I can't. You don't understand, I'm on the Supreme Court, I can't leave.
The Supreme Court was secure and prestigious. The UN job would be dangerous, thankless, and expose her to public scrutiny and criticism. But Arbour had dedicated years to the defense of human rights, and those rights are being shredded all around the world. She accepts Kofi Annan's offer.
I know it sounds a bit silly to say, I only have one life, there's only so much I can contribute. At this point in my life, I think I could be more useful doing something in the UN.
I think Kofi Annan called Louise Arbour because she had been a prosecutor at the War Crimes Tribunal in The Hague and for Rwanda. She was the prosecutor that brought the Milosevic indictment, and I think her name was made through that.
I'm perfectly certain that Mr. Milosevic thought that he could keep me out of Kosovo, while I believe that he can't keep himself out of The Hague. We'll just see.
The main part of her reputation, I always felt, was her enormous respect for the law. She brought with her an absolute conviction that the law was the right way to see things.
When Louise Arbour took office, she faced her own office being in disarray. She faced enormous challenges, particularly in Africa. You had a ruthless war being waged in northern Uganda, and you had well over a year and a half's worth of awful ethnic cleansing in Darfur. These were enormous problems that the international community was doing far too little to grapple with.
Darfur, in western Sudan, is the worst violation of human rights this century. When tribal conflict grew into rebellion, the Sudanese government unleashed brutal militias, the Janjaweed. It's a lawless region now, where hundreds of thousands of people are killed, thousands of women raped, half the population forced from their homes. It's been called a genocide. The Sudanese government wants no interference. They're protected by powerful allies on the UN Security Council, China and Russia. Against long odds, Arbour takes a personal and professional risk. She moves Darfur to the top of her agenda.
In Darfur, she can go, she can speak, she can use the bully pulpit that she has. But that power, that ability to highlight abuses is still going to be small compared to the decision-making machinery of the Security Council. If the most powerful member states, if some of the most powerful member states take the view that national sovereignty should trump the question of human rights, the treatment of individuals, then neither Louise Arbour nor Kofi Annan is going to be able to overturn that.
The UN is divided about Darfur, but Arbour cannot wait. She pushes the Sudanese government for permission to visit. What she sees appalls her.
Huge camps, 50, 70,000 people with nothing, essentially. And at night, any international or national organization just left. So in the middle of the night, they were totally exposed. The concept that we came out with was protection by presence. We had to flood Darfur with international human rights officers, humanitarian workers, just to be with these people.
The mere fact of having people watching, people from outside, is, I think, a deterrent and a support to the victims. A second very important aspect, I think, is truth. When we're there, we gather information which gets us closer to the truth. When we're not there, we can only rely on what we hear, which is not very credible when you're trying to convince a government that it needs to improve its human rights record.
After 10 days, Arbour returns to Geneva, full of plans.
Within about a week, I got an agreement from the government of Sudan that I could deploy 8 human rights officers in Darfur. And I thought, this is great. I've done my part of the job, which is put all the politics in place, do all the lobbying. Now, this office that I'm now leading will just make it happen.
In fact, almost nothing happened, mainly because Arbour's office had no experience recruiting or dispatching teams into such dangerous places.
I think the organization itself just, even though they wanted to make it happen, really hadn't operated like that before, in that kind of a very rapid response mode. And they just couldn't do it.
Arbour wasn't even aware her people hadn't been sent.
She had been telling ambassadors, the press, the Secretary General, that she had 7 people on the ground. And she believed it. And then she found out she had 1 person or 2, whatever it was, but not 7. This was the most devastating, maybe a day of her life. I've never seen her before or since undergo such a traumatic experience. I think it left her feeling that she was out there on her own.
So that became, for me, a sort of a loss of innocence. I realized what my real job would have to be.
And that job was to be an active High Commissioner for Human Rights, to go into the field and confront abuses. But the UN is run by its member states, all 191 of them, and none of them are looking to be held to account.
What this particular office has been set up to do is to be a kind of think and talk shop. I believe that you cannot neither promote efficiently, certainly not protect human rights by sitting in an office pontificating. Right? You have to be out there in the field.
I think when Louise decided to move from what she inherited to what she wanted, which was a very much more proactive and activist office, I think she was up against a lot of inertia. I think she was up against a lot of bureaucratic resistance.
If many at the UN want her office to do little, this is not Arbour's way. She persuades and harasses member states and finally gets the Security Council to set up a commission of inquiry into Darfur. One person that Arbour makes sure is on the commission is someone who impressed her as a Supreme Court clerk, a young human rights lawyer, Fanny Lafontaine.
My first assignment in Darfur was in the fall of 2004. So I joined the International Commission of Inquiry on Darfur to look into whether there were any violations of international human rights law, of international humanitarian law, which is the laws of the war, or genocide committed in Darfur.
The evidence is everywhere. The story hits the world media, and no one with a television can claim ignorance of the slaughter in Darfur. The former war crimes prosecutor now raises the stakes. She wants those responsible to face criminal charges.
So the Security Council, in a very historic resolution, referred the situation of Darfur to the International Criminal Court, which is now a permanent court in The Hague.
Arbour wants justice as well as peace. But by asking to charge perpetrators with war crimes, she risks making dangerous enemies.
Clearly, there are times where they don't want me to do my job, or they don't want me to do it now. Many will say peace always comes first, justice comes second. You don't push for accountability of heads of states when you're trying to negotiate a peace deal. I very often have an almost impossible job of trying to persuade those who are in a position to make decisions that, for instance, when the Security Council launches a peace initiative somewhere, that they should put right in it that war criminals will be prosecuted. That's hard. That's a hard sell.
Arbour fights hard and wins her case for Darfur. Next, she shines a light on a long-forgotten crisis.
Madam High Commissioner, welcome to Gulu, where your newest office is located. We've been operating here for several months. We feel that it's an immense honor to have you visit us when we are so new on the ground. And for the crisis in northern Uganda, we also feel that your presence is very, very important in terms of raising the profile of what people call the forgotten crisis.
Northern Uganda is simply the saddest place in the world. 25,000 to 30,000 children have been kidnapped in the last 7 or 8 years, forced into sexual servitude or to become child soldiers or pack mules, or all three, by this crazy group of monsters who call themselves the Lord's Resistance Army.
For the last 20 years, the 2 million people of northern Uganda have lived in terror of an armed group, the LRA. The government's way of protecting the population from the LRA is to have the army herd them into vast refugee camps where they live off food aid from abroad. It's gone on so long that half the people living in the camps were born there. International agencies have visited over the years, but the government has insisted on ending the crisis on its own terms. Despite this, Arbour has set up an operation in Uganda. her team will attempt to focus international attention on these people's lives.
There are many of us in the United Nations who have heard about the particular problems that you are facing here, generally in northern Uganda, but particularly in these camps. So I wanted to come and hear directly from you what we can do to assist.
I don't know how we are going to make assure us so that we know what you have come for is going to materialize itself. Because so many people were coming here, there was no feedback. So how can you assure us that what you have come for is going to materialize?
Well, the one thing I could tell you is I can't come here to make promises that I can't keep. I will go to Kampala, I will meet with the president, and I will tell him what I've heard here.
Fear of the LRA pervades the camps, and so does anger with the government.
President, peace to Uganda. Peace more Uganda. One job in North Uganda. Keep peace more.
Our president is saying that we have peace in Uganda, but we, the people of northern Uganda, we do not have any peace. You have seen yourself. Are you seeing any peace here? You have entered the world there and you've seen what is in there. People are dying every hour. Even if they are to go to the government hospital, there is nothing, but the government is not helping us. Thank you so much.
Thank you for talking.
My name is Betty Ariem.
From Pabo.
From Pabo. Thank you.
Thank you.
Arbour has no army, no doctors, no truckloads of food or medicine. Human rights can seem abstract, even irrelevant to people struggling to survive in a dangerous, remote corner of the world.
That's the part that to me is frustrating and makes me sometimes even question whether I should be there if my presence is raising completely false expectations that all of a sudden it's all going to take a turn for the better because the UN is coming. Then I sort of wonder whether it's an appropriate intervention.
Irene was kidnapped by the LRA when she was 12 years old. For 5 years, she was kept as a sexual slave by an LRA commander named Vincent. Her story is important to Arbour. Rape and abduction are not only human rights violations, they are war crimes.
We had to do the cooking and carry all the luggage. It was a group of about 200, headed by Vincent Oti. We traveled day in and day out, always running. Each time you're attacked, you have to run for your life. When we ended up in Uganda, I had a chance to escape.
I think you're very brave.
To survive in the bush, you need to be courageous. There are attacks by the army. Helicopters come and shoot at you. Then there are the wild animals who might also kill you if you don't run fast.
I am too, and if I don't want to also, I don't know, there's a space that you're not comfortable invading her privacy. By far the most disturbing part of that visit was the evening that we spent with the so-called night commuters.
For the children of northern Uganda, terror comes in the night. Every evening as darkness falls, they take to the road and head towards a protected shelter, hoping to escape LRA kidnappers. There are so many of these children, they are called the night commuters.
Now, did you just come here tonight?
No.
No? No. You come all the time here?
Yes. Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't see many girls. Where are the girls? Okay, now I see you. Okay, let's go.
The rebels took all our belongings, our land, everything. Even sleeping here, I'm afraid the rebels will jump over the wall and attack us.
Day and night, people here plead for help.
The UN Security Council, why not? Why not say, this has been going on for 20 years? What is the problem about politically solving this problem? Then we can begin to address the problems in the community. This is a sticking plaster on here.
The leaders of the LRA might never be brought to justice. Still, Arbour's team has documented evidence of crimes against humanity, and her visit has brought some high-level attention to northern Uganda.
Anyway, there's lots of smiley faces here around.
It's not easy to solve a situation, but it's also quite extraordinary when all of a sudden some kind of movement puts the spotlight on one issue that you can, in fact, start to deal with this so-called forgotten crisis. I think the frustration is to think that there are just so many you don't even know about. So many of these situations where the needs are critical, but there's nobody there.
It's not only remote developing nations that get Arbour's attention. Sometimes human rights violators are the most powerful countries in the world. Arbour's office is in Geneva, but it's New York where she has to fight for money and influence.
I think now it's clear to everyone that we've got to get out of declarations and move into action. We have to start implementing some of these rights that we have now for decades. Declared, proclaimed, we've denounced infringements, we've deplored lack of action. We've got to get on with it. But this is huge. I think we essentially have to change entirely the culture to try to persuade member states that the United Nations had to take ownership of its human rights system.
I don't know how much she believes it. Individual human rights is a deeply contested subject in the UN. And the UN did not have a human rights commissioner at all until the mid-1990s. And even then, it was a source of big struggle. The then Secretary General Boutros Boutros-Ghali opposed having a human rights commissioner at first. And his own view on human rights was the classic third world view, which is to say that the focus on individual rights was itself a Western preoccupation. And it was a form of imperialism in which the West accused non-Western and non-democratic countries of various abuses.
Arbour walks a tightrope between diplomacy and activism.
The key, I think, is to engage with governments in a manner that remains very respectful of who they are, but at the same time to challenge them, first privately, and then, when need be, publicly. But if you profoundly upset enough member states, at the end of the day, that's what it is, enough governments, that they will, in the worst case scenario, they could flatly abolish this office. But in many other ways, they could make it impossible for us to have the money, the equipment, the visas, to enter, then we're totally impotent. That's the judgment call you have to make all the time. How far you could press without jeopardizing the operation entirely. Okay, oh, no problem, we'll get together. I've been a bit squished last couple of days.
Arbour is in some ways an international supplicant for human rights. She asks to visit countries and only goes if the governments agree. And no one has to agree. But in the past year, she's gone to more than a dozen countries, including Colombia, Nepal, the Ivory Coast, Guatemala, and China. She's even met with the Russian head of state twice.
I was invited by President Putin.
For Arbour, a meeting with Putin is both an opportunity and a risk. She cannot confront him directly.
I meet him as the head of state of a country that has lots of human rights issues. And he knows that I will want to raise some of these issues. If I may, Mr. President, put forward maybe... I also meet him as the head of state of a very influential permanent member of the Security Council. I want him to want to help me when I need him to do something elsewhere. Him and his Minister of Foreign Affairs, I want them to believe that I'm a credible person and that they should support me.
В России есть свои представления о том, как в мире в целом, в том числе в рамках контртеррористических операций, защищаются и соблюдаются права человека. Как они соблюдаются в некоторых регионах мира и странах мира, где, безусловно, в России есть определенные и значительные интересы.
In 2 wars against Chechen separatists, the Russian army has destroyed cities and killed over 100,000 Chechens. This is Vladimir Putin's war on terror. Like other heads of state, he tells Arbour that his country is different, his conflict unique, his methods, however harsh, necessary.
These cultural, religious, traditional values cannot be taken to such a different interpretation that they deny the right altogether. Right? There's a boundary where the right is truly universal.
The whole moral underpinnings that Louise Arbour draws on presupposes that, in fact, rights begin with individuals. We talk about this as if we all agree on the primacy of individual human rights, but we don't. We don't, and even if we do, we only agree in theory. In practice, most members of the UN do not accept the sense of the utter sanctity of the rights of the individual when those rights come in conflict with the rights of the state.
Including the country where the Human Rights Charter was formulated, the most powerful country on earth and the most powerful one in the UN, the United States.
After September 11th, everybody was predicting that the world would never be the same. Before September 11th, we had made huge progress in civil and political rights. You know, right to counsel, arbitrary detention, disappearances. We were lagging behind, but I thought about ready to make a real breakthrough in economic, social, and cultural rights. September 11th has created an enormous setback. In the United States, for instance, there was a lively debate in the media and obviously in political affairs about whether, in fact, there are circumstances where it's totally appropriate to have recourse to torture. Now, this was startling. It's an absolute prohibition in international human rights law.
She came to the job of High Commissioner with that issue on her mind. The rights, not only of the victims, but even of the terrorists, were big issues for her.
A post-9/11 United States has broken away from international laws and treaties. In prisons such as Guantanamo Bay and Abu Ghraib, In secret prisons around the world, the U.S. is holding people with little regard to conventions or declarations of human rights, all in the name of security.
It's a question of balancing. Certainly in a democracy, you have to balance your security interests and your liberty interests.
The ones in Guantanamo Bay are killers. They don't share the same values we share.
I think what has happened since September 11 is the introduction of a very dangerous concept as part of this balancing exercise. The true balance is for each person to ask himself or herself, how much of my liberty am I prepared to surrender to protect my security? Now, I think what's been introduced is, how much of the liberty of others am I prepared to sacrifice to increase my security?
She was very careful initially not to antagonize anybody openly. And there were some times when she would say something privately, but not publicly. I think there was some frustration in the office about that occasionally. When people feel very passionate about issues, they want somebody who has power to say something. Her reticence and her care and her carefulness about that is sometimes frustrating for the people working with her.
Okay, I got you. Okay.
In the summer of 2005, Arbour goes to an international human rights conference run by former U.S. President Jimmy Carter. Encouraged by Carter not to be timid, Arbour takes a strong public stand.
I'm very concerned about assertions in some sectors of U.S. Policy that they are, in fact, exceptions, or that they should be exceptions to recourse to torture.
This is what I think is illegitimate. She's giving her opinions on the stature of the United States. Well, that's very interesting. If she were a newspaper editorialist, that would be her prerogative. But she's an international civil servant, and I think it's inappropriate for her to comment on those kinds of decisions.
A post-9/11 Bush administration strikes back hard at any criticism from the UN. But Arbour and the Americans do see eye to eye on one issue: the horrors unfolding in Darfur. Ignoring the danger, Arbour heads back into the war zone. Darfur has become a situation close to Arbour's heart. In May of 2006, despite the anarchy on the ground, she visits her team.
She had a need to go back and see for herself, see whether the government had in fact implemented some of her recommendations. And she also needed, she thought, to go and encourage her colleagues in the field.
Arbour has 70 workers on the ground now, and many other humanitarian workers have joined them. But now they too are targets for the killers, and the population is more threatened than ever.
The level of sexual violence has not been reduced despite the initiatives taken by the government. The government claims that women will not tell if they've been raped. It's not in their culture. And I had no difficulty speaking to these women the first time and this time with my colleagues. And these women told me, you know, the circumstances. They were out collecting firewood, attacked by, they always say janjaweed, which collectively means these people in uniform from Arab tribes. And so this time, same stories. The striking difference was they were there, many of them, also with the children that were the product of their aggression. So this was actually pretty startling.
Whenever they go out of the camp to collect firewood, either to cook or to sell, they're systematically being attacked. And when we ask them why do you go out of the camp if you get raped, and they say, well, because the men will be killed. So, and they were saying this before, so rape has become a lesser evil in this conflict in Darfur.
So what are we doing now?
I think we're going straight to the Wali. Okay. And then from the Wali to the airport.
The Wali is the all-powerful provincial governor. While he speaks of peace, the atrocities get worse every day.
The South Darfur government set up these rape investigative committees that go to the camps. They try to collect information on the sexual violence that's happening in the camps. From what our colleagues have been reporting and from what we can tell, these are just paper initiatives. They don't work.
We are, as Muslims, by principles, we are supporting, we do not support any violence against women. We are supporting and taking care of women.
Sitting in these meetings can at times, I could say, be quite painful, difficult.
Therefore, and in this regard, I say this, our customs and traditions forbids a woman, if she is forced for rape, for many social hazards, she never dares to stop because she loses a lot of other opportunities.
In my professional opinion, no serious work can be done on sexual and gender-based violence unless it's done by women. And therefore, I think it's important that those who are sent to investigate, including police officers or members of these committees, have to have women in their ranks so they can interact with the victims. But this time, I think the most shocking impression was how little progress had been made. It's very frustrating, but that's the reality. It's certainly not going to get better by walking away from it and saying nothing. But there's no illusion that by merely documenting, exposing, advocating, pushing, pressuring, that things will fall into place. There are very powerful interests pulling in other directions.
In New York, the United States is pressing for strong measures against the Sudanese government. It wants to end the genocide, but China will have none of it.
When you have a highly abusive government like the Sudanese, to use a baseball metaphor, they only understand hardball. You've got to be tough with them. And unfortunately, the major powers have not been willing to put that kind of intense pressure on Khartoum, largely because the Chinese government has stood in the way. Yes, indeed, China has oil interests in southern Sudan, but those oil interests should not be pursued at the price of the blood of the people of Sudan.
As the genocide in Darfur rages on, Arbour suddenly faces another crisis. Israel invades Lebanon, and Arbour again finds herself caught in the crossfire. The politics of survival once again trump human rights in the war between Israel and Hezbollah. Arbour, as the High Commissioner for Human Rights, cautions both sides.
Thus, I reminded all belligerents that war crimes and crimes against humanity may be committed, even by those who believe, accurately or not, that their combat is a just one and their cause a worthy pursuit.
So are you particularly pointing fingers at Israel's response here?
No, I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. We have to tell those in a position of command, remind them not only of international humanitarian law, but of international criminal law that may down the road engage their personal responsibility. On the surface of it, these are non-combatants. That's the point.
You know, in America, prosecutors are not supposed to threaten people in public based on press reports. And I would just say, as one lawyer to another, that to Mrs. Arbour, that she should consider her professional ethics and responsibilities very carefully here before threatening criminal charges based on press accounts.
It's not only hardline Americans who disagree with Arbour. She's received her fair share of criticism, even in her own country. Despite that, she's made significant advances. Arbour has teams in nearly 30 countries around the world. Human rights is a part of every UN peacekeeping mission, and she's doubled her budget.
Yes, it could very possibly have been a huge delegation from Taiwan. Yeah, see, that's the thing. I don't wear lipstick very much. I don't have a mirror. I don't know how to put it on. Maybe I can see myself in my BlackBerry. Oh, yeah, look, this works perfectly well.
Does it?
Yeah.
Is it clear
enough?
enough?
At least gives you a general idea where your mouth is.
The way Louise has transformed the office is very, now you can see it concretely in the everyday work of all of us. Now we don't negotiate the mandate. When she sets up an office in any country, she makes it clear that it's a general mandate that covers both the promotion of human rights and the protection of human rights, because we can't do one without the other.
Louise Arbour became High Commissioner for Human Rights because she felt she could help people. Halfway into her 4-year term, she's been blocked, ignored, and publicly criticized. But she's still determined to fight for human rights.
I don't have the luxury of silence. It's not a question of whether I have to weigh, whether I'm going to inevitably make enemies on all sides. That's not the point. If I have a bias, if I have a constituency, it's the victims of human rights violations. These are the people I'm charged to worry about. I have to stand up and speak for them. If the consequences are that I'll make more enemies than friends and from all sides, well, so be it. That's what I'm supposed to do.